Hello, everybody. This is Justin Case of American Newscape, joining our friend and honeybee wrangler Cricket Aldridge, bringing you Bee Havens. Hello, Cricket. Welcome back to American Newscape.
Hello.
Well, it's always a wonderful opportunity for us to catch up with you about what's going on in your bee world.
Yay, so much is going on.
You like those open-ended questions? Tell us give us an idea what the day in the life of a bee wrangler actually is.
Okay, so I have my designated Wednesdays, my bee day that I manage other people's hives, clients that I have throughout the valley. So I go and inspect their colonies, add boxes, check for honey, all that stuff. Butterfly Wonderland, JP Morgan Chase, then a bunch of people who've just contacted me that want bees but don't want to care for them. So not care for them, but just the work of caring for them. So that's all my Wednesdays are morning till I fall asleep doing that. And then right now I get phone calls all day long telling me that some bees have moved into my wherever. And, my first question to them is, how long ago did they move in? Did you see them move in? And right now it's early in the season, so I try to get to the ones that have just moved in fast because I can get those out a lot faster and less expensive. So I'm chasing bees pretty much all over the valley.
And it is bee swarming season, right?
Yeah, bee swarming season right now is probably coming to an end. Well, I think they'll probably swarm throughout May, and then, while the flowers are blooming, like the palo verdes, the mesquites, that tells the bees, okay, there's a lot of food out there, let's reproduce. And so that's when you get the swarming. And as soon as there's no flowers, then it's really, all those swarms are now established colonies, and people are starting to notice the bees that have moved in. So people will call and say, oh, I've got a swarm in my tree. But people say just it'll move on. And so it will move on generally, but it might move into, and I think I've said this before, it might move into a place you don't want them to move into. And those are the ones I'll be getting all summer long.
All
But
summer
right
long.
now it's swarms. And I love getting swarms, and I love when they've just moved in, I could smoke them out. So those are the ones I'm chasing right now.
Okay, but they will still migrate and break off into swarms in the dead of the summer in the desert Southwest as well.
Well, they not necessarily. No, not in the. They won't have as many swarms. What can happen is the food sources run out in a certain location. The bees didn't know that, and they'll have to move to
Oh, okay.
find new place. So that's the kind of swarms you'll get in the middle of summer. But really, right now, I'm just chasing swarms, spring swarms. Through the summer is when I'm doing the cutouts of walls and floors and that kind of thing, which we're starting to do now. But right now, if I catch them, I can smoke them out in most cases.
Well, and some swarms will actually adhere to a branch in a tree, and then those are the
Yep.
ones that typically move on, right? Maybe.
Yeah, no, those ones, if they can't find a place, they'll stay there. But I don't know, did I go through what a swarm actually is? Do you want me to go through that so it helps
Well,
people?
yeah. Go ahead, Cricket. I mean, some
I
people
mean, I
will.
know you know, but maybe someone's just watching.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
when there's an abundance of food, this is a natural process for honeybees, all honeybees. It triggers what's called the swarming instinct. So the bees are going to create one or more new queens, and before those new queens hatch, then that old queen is put on a diet so that she can fly. And before that hatches, and it's only 2 weeks for a queen to go from egg to emerging. So in that time period, old queen goes on a diet, and half the colony will leave with her to look for a new place to live. So that's what's happening right now. And Africanized colonies will do that a lot. They'll send out many, many swarms, whereas European colonies typically will send out one. So that's why there's so many here in Arizona. And so when you're seeing a big swarm of bees fly by and then they attach to a tree or something, they're resting because the queen has very little energy. Mostly she has not been eating. So they're resting, giving her food, and scout bees are going out looking for a permanent location. So they're going all over the place. And then they come back and they have discussions and decide which is the best place. And typically that takes 1 to 3 days. So you'll see a swarm hanging for 1 to 3 days. And then they'll move into a location that is much more permanent. And so during those 3 days is when people call me and say, I've got bees, or they'll put it on Facebook, and half the people say, just leave them alone. They'll move on. But like I said, they are going to move on. They're not going to just move on into another tree. They're going to go into a place that's permanent that you don't want them to move into. So that could be your house, it could be your neighbor's house, a tree, or wherever. So just be aware when that happens and you let them go. They might be in a place you don't want them, and it'll cost a lot more to get them out. So that's what a swarm is.
I didn't, well, you assumed I knew. I didn't know a lot of that. I didn't know that they quit feeding the established queen, so she would get the urge to, let's say, migrate. So now she's malnutritioned and she's flying and she's migrating. That makes perfect sense. That actually explains it. So now they have to rest and they can start feeding her once they're on the move, right?
Exactly, because typically a queen is too heavy to fly. She's well fed and all her only job is to lay eggs, so they're always feeding her, and so they need her to be able to fly, so they stop feeding her.
No, that makes perfect sense.
It's so funny. I've been getting some calls. Some people get some funny information out there. I get calls from people or messages saying, I just bought a queen and I'm hoping you could help me know where to get some bees. Or I just got a queen. I'm going to stick it outside of this wall that I saw bees going into so that the bees will go to the queen. I'm like, what? You can't just buy a queen and expect bees to be like, oh, there's a queen, let's go over there. That happens actually more than you could imagine. I don't know where they're getting that. I'm like, if it's a colony, it already has its own queen, and you're not going to lure it out of your wall with a queen bee that's going to die in a matter of hours if it's not taken care of.
And sadly, people will sell them queens without asking, without requiring that they know what the heck they're doing.
Well, probably. There's queen breeders all over, and I'm sure they don't ask. They probably assume if you're buying a queen, you know what you're doing. And queens aren't cheap. If you're buying a queen all by yourself, it's going to be like $60 to have her shipped from Hawaii or someplace like that. So it's not a little expense. So part of my job I see is educating people, and I like getting those funny, weird questions because I would never imagine somebody didn't know that. So that's something I can address, send out on my Facebook page or things like that. So I love being able to teach people how bees actually work.
Well, and we are duped. I remember days in metropolitan Phoenix when the aphids would get to the roses, I would buy ladybug cocoons or packages of ladybugs. Mm-hmm. And I finally spoke to an entomologist, which is a form of insect expert, and they asked me, they stick around for about 48 hours, don't they? And I said, yeah, they do. Then there's just not a sign of them anymore. He goes, yeah, they all flew north, which is what they do after they hatch.
How funny. I didn't know that. I have gotten ladybugs before, and no, they didn't stay, so that makes sense. 48
hours. Yeah. So if all the aphids they can eat in 48 hours, you're good. Or if you can get a
Oh,
neighbor 10 miles north of you to buy a couple cocoons, you might get a few of those. But
that's hilarious. Yeah,
but
that's
but
wow.
it doesn't come with the directions of buying ladybugs.
Right, you think, oh, ladybugs eat aphids. Let's get ladybugs.
Right.
Huh?
And
How interesting.
I've had praying mantises and basically had the. You better enjoy the babies running around because you only have them for a short period of time. And they're all very small once they hatch,
Hmm.
so enjoy them. But back to you, Cricket. People don't care what I know about ladybugs, but
Oh, I bet they
we
do.
we do care about what you know about bees. Hey, you've been doing some, and I'm going to provide links to some of the extractions that you've been doing because maybe it's just me. I find them fascinating. Talk to us about some of the recent bee extractions, the removal of
Hmm.
hives or removal of bees from various projects you've been on recently.
Okay, so I've definitely had some fun ones, and they are fun. I love smoking bees out is my favorite thing to do because one, I'm not dealing with sticky honey or comb, and all I have to do is basically build a fire and smoke bees. So it's a total game to sit there and watch them pour out of something and just watch for the queen and then catch her. So I know you've seen one. I had a speaker. Someone had bees that had moved into a speaker on their patio. That was really funny. And it wasn't even that big of a speaker, honestly. And when you see the amount of bees that came out of it, it's pretty crazy. So that's fun. I had bees in a saguaro cactus just move in. And again, if the people had waited to tell me, or if they didn't know they moved in, and the bees had built comb, it's almost impossible to smoke them out because the comb that they build prevents the smoke from penetrating the colony, for one thing. And then the queen is invested in laying eggs, and all the nurse bees are invested in taking care of the larvae, so they are not going to come out. So catch them and let me know right away. So the saguaro is easy to smoke out. It's crazy because you think, oh, there's all these bees coming out, and then all of a sudden the queen comes out, and then it's tens of thousands of bees coming out of something, and it's just beautiful. I just last night smoked them out of a concrete wall. Um, and it's kind of fun. I had some friends give me a hammer drill that goes, you can
Mm-hmm.
go through block walls, and that's a game changer for me because basically what you need to do is get to one side of the colony or under it if the entrance is above, and then I can drill a hole and just smoke and smoke and smoke, and it pushes them out. And like this is another little myth. People think that every time I go, they're like, "Oh, does the smoke calm the bees?" No, smoke doesn't calm bees. In my experience, anyway. I think I've heard it, but I don't think it calms the bees at all. I'm like, it does exactly the same thing it would do to you. It will burn your eyes, it stings your eyes, and you want to get away from it. So, like when I'm inspecting my colonies, I will use smoke to move the bees so I don't squish them with my fingers picking up the frame. So, it also does mask some of their alarm pheromones. So um, bees communicate through scent. So that smoke kind of keeps them from telling everyone, "Hey, that's your target."
Yeah, let's go attack this
Yeah,
lady.
exactly. But as far as calming them, I've not ever seen that happen. So
Well,
it really just moves them.
that's a misnomer with it. I think a lot of us have always believed. So there again, that's interesting information. So
Yeah.
you've
I mean, it's
what?
my experience. I have heard it from old beekeeping books too, but I really don't see it calming bees. In fact, when you puff smoke into a hive, it roars. The colony just roars inside. So to me, that's not calming.
Well, that was a rumor started by the bee smoking equipment companies.
Well, we do need the bee smoke to help our bees to move them around so we're not smashing them. But yeah, I don't know who started it, or maybe someone that's their experience, but it's not my experience.
Well, if anybody does believe that smoke calms the bees down where they're easier to handle, let us know. Put it in the
Yeah.
comments.
I will.
Just because you comment that doesn't mean we'll believe it, but you should
That's
weigh in.
true.
You should weigh in.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah, good
Okay.
point.
One thing I've noticed is some of your extractions or tree extractions, they're coming out of various holes. So you're looking for a specific
Oh my God.
entrance, right?
Yes. Well, finding the main entrance is easy. Obviously, the bees are going in and out of it.
Right.
But trees like mulberries, olive trees, and cottonwoods are the ones that I find are the hollowest. And wherever it seems like wherever there's branches or if it's cracking, there are so many holes in a tree. So I might be, and this is important with trap outs. Smoke outs are, it's not so bad when you're you can smoke one hole and they'll just like come out many holes as long as they come out. But the trap outs are the hard ones in trees because a trap out requires that you have only one entrance because you're trapping them out of that one entrance with a cone so they come out but can't get back in. And if they find another way in and out, they'll go that way, and so your trap out's useless. So that's the pain for me with trees. Smoking isn't as hard.
Well, do I understand correctly? A trap out's where you're capturing the bees to become a working hive, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's trap out is so smoke out is the first thing I would try if the bees just moved in. If the bees have established themselves and smoke doesn't work, then the option is a trap out for places that you can't open up to get the hive out. So there's cutouts, so that's when you can cut a wall or ceiling open. That's a cutout. And if you can't do that, like in block walls or trees, then it's a trap out. So you're basically putting a mesh cone that only one bee can go out of, and somehow they don't go back in. And then it takes time, sometimes a month, although my last trap out took 2 days.
Wow.
The bees just swarmed out and went in the tree. I'm like, wow, that's a record. Usually it's a month or more. Just for them to come out, move into the hive I've left for them. The queen comes out sometimes she doesn't come out. But by the time it's over, I've already given them a new queen. So it's to me, that's still saving the colony.
So I'm learning so much. So in a smoke out, sometimes you can just smoke them where they'll decide that they want to migrate somewhere else. Is that correct?
Yep. Well, a smoke out, whenever I do a smoke out, I have a hive box there. And I try to put it as close to the entrance as possible so the bees come out of the wall or tree and go into my hive, but not always. Sometimes if the queen flies off, she'll land in a tree somewhere and I'll see the cluster and then I can capture it as if it were just a swarm. So sometimes they just take off and fly and sometimes they crawl out.
And they typically don't go very far.
No, they would go like 10 feet.
Okay. I remember when I had the swarm, very large circular pattern against the garage. Some of them were actually scouting within the garage.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume they were looking for potential habitat for themselves, or were they
right.
just happening in there?
Yeah, I mean they don't want to go far, so when they swarm, they're going to look close.
Something we all need to remember.
Yes.
I imagine now that the queen's left, the queen's gone on her Atkins diet. She's left the hive. She doesn't really want to go any further than she has to because she's not feeling well because she hadn't been fed. Mm-hmm. So then they go to this resting thing. There must be like 10 or 12 really smart bees that are out there looking for a new home. And the rest of these bees come back and just start running off the mouth, not knowing what they're talking about. So they all have to wait around till the really smart bees come back and tell them where they're going to go.
Pretty much. Actually, there's a book called Honeybee Democracy that goes through, somebody has studied this communication that bees have during swarms and how they decide. I haven't read it yet, but I've gotten a few synopses of it, and I look forward to reading it. But that's basically what happens.
I'm guessing they listen to Bob. Bob says, "Hey, we
Right?
need
Well,
to go."
I don't know. I'm sure it's a female.
Oh, okay.
So,
Well, they listen to Sally, and Sally says, "Hey, we need to go over here. Needs food, needs to be close. We've got to get the queen there in healthy condition." There's so many factors.
yeah, it's got to be a good environment. Although, I always, it's funny doing this work as a beekeeper because, new beekeepers are wanting, their home has to be pristine and the hive has to be, oriented in just the right location and all of these perfect things. And then I go do bee removals out of compost bins and ice cream makers and shop vacs.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? I don't think the bees are that particular. They just need to have a hole to live in.
Well, they may know more than we do.
It's true. Well, yes, they do know more than we do about what they're looking for, but they don't need their environment to be perfectly oriented to the sun or anything else.
When professionals like yourself get together in groups and conferences, do you all agree? Do you debate? Or are you there to absorb as much information as possible?
What do you think? There's always the saying, ask two beekeepers a question, you'll get like 6 answers.
6 answers, and maybe this, and then maybe that. So
yeah,
I can.
And it's when you're new, you know everything, of course. And then as time goes by, you realize, you know what? There's more right answers to this than my answer. So you just that worked for that person, but it didn't work for me.
Well,
yeah.
I would assume it's an evolution of a beekeeper. Is you're always going to be learning. You're going to be learning from today's hive. You're going to be learning from today's smoke out. You're going to be learning from today's trap out, and you're building that database of bee wrangling knowledge, so to speak.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And actually I've been thinking so much exactly what you're talking about, because I talk to people who say, oh, I called a beekeeper, or I called 10 pest control companies, and they said these bees are Africanized, and where they're at, it's impossible to get them out without $1,000 worth of work. Or another one says, yeah, the beekeeper came out and said, this is impossible, you can't get them out of here. And I used to be like, oh, they're just so stupid, how could they say that? And then I just thought, you know what, every year I get better at what I do, and 3 years ago, that would have been impossible for me. And so I would have said, this is impossible. Now I go back and like, wow, I've learned so much. I know how to do this now. I can get these bees out where before I wouldn't have been able to. And then as far as exterminators go, they just don't know really anything about bees. And they, a lot of them tell people, we'll humanely get bees out. But then I'm thinking, you might humanely, usually when they say humanely, it just means they kill them humanely, whatever that means. I mean, they don't suffer, but also the ones that say they do take them out alive. These people they're not beekeepers. They don't have beehives. They might take out bees. That's not exactly what we were talking about, but it goes along the line. They take them out and then they put them in the desert. And then some exterminators kind of, they start thinking, hey, I don't like doing this. And they'll call beekeepers, or they'll become beekeepers. But really to say this is impossible, I don't really say that so much anymore. I just say this is something I can't do, or maybe someone else can do it. But I can say yes to so many more things that I used to think was impossible.
Well, in a lot of the exterminators, it's about money. And when the phones start to ring, when the bees start to fly, everybody's phone's ringing. So you're picking and choosing.
Yes.
I want to go
Oh
take.
yeah, and I've had people, even just this week, someone was quoted $5,000 to cut some bees out of their wall. They're like, yes, there's these bees. There's 10 pounds of honey in your wall, and it's going to cost $5,000. I'm like, 10 pounds of honey. You know how much 10 pounds of honey is? Like a few jars of honey. It's not, honey's heavy, but 10 pounds of honey in your wall is nothing. Um, and so there's definitely cheaper ways to do that. But people don't know. That's another education. I mean, I need to make money for sure. I've got to live. And
Right.
I like being able to make money doing bee removals. Some people think it should be free, but it costs me equipment, it costs me gas, it costs me time, and I like being able to make money doing things like this. And but I also know I want to be fair with people. I wouldn't want someone to charge so much for doing something like that. So I try to be really fair with people, so that it helps both of us.
Well, I think a lot of people, like such as yourself, that are actually have this passion for bees, that are keeping and managing hives. It's a whole different. It's a whole different perspective. And
Oh yeah.
knowing you want to save those bees as much as you want to remove those bees from the situation that they're in.
Oh, for sure. And there's some that I do for free, because I know the people can't. Or if I can't, then I can refer to someone, other beekeepers I know who are kind of newer and they're just looking to get some bees, and they would do it for nothing or a much less. So I try to figure out the best way to help the bees and the people. So definitely, I want to save the bees.
Well, and I would encourage everybody out there, whoever is helping you, try and find that passion in them, because
Mm-hmm.
the world needs these bees to survive. And
It's so.
we don't need them poisoned. We don't need them. There's lots of other ways of handling it. And Cricket has told us many times, Africanized hives that are aggressive, and I'm guessing not all Africanized hives are aggressive, but the ones that are can be managed and tamed.
Yeah, they can be managed, requeened. So essentially, I mean, I guess you're really changing the genetics of the whole colony, but you can rescue an African colony. Some people, I do keep African colonies out in the desert where there's no people. Um, if you can keep an African colony smaller instead of letting it get really big, it's much more manageable. Um, but when I would never say that an African colony is, that they're not worth saving. It's just a lot of people hear African, they hear, or Africanized, they hear killer bees, and they think that is, um, that there's, it's just fear. It's just fear altogether. And then there's the whole Africanized, even in our community, people not wanting to use the term Africanized, either African bees, but even they are African bees from Africa. And it's just a way of designating the type of bee they are. Um, just like we have Italian bees and Russian bees, those are all Apis mellifera. But African bees are Apis mellifera scutellata. Our African bees are. There's other subspecies in Africa, but that's the one we have. Um,
Are you
but
speaking? You're speaking Latin to us.
well, yeah, I guess.
We
We're speaking
apologize.
genus species. Come on.
It's Latin. I know it. I had Latin. I'm old. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Um, it's so fascinating, Cricket. You're managing these bees. How much honey do you collect a month, just for curiosity's
Well, we
sake?
don't collect much honey a month, honestly. There's usually one or two times in the year that you can collect honey, and that's at the end of this season, or
Okay.
at the end of like May, June. And also, sometimes if we had a good monsoon, you can collect honey in September. So there's seasons for the bees. And honestly, we don't collect as much honey as someone that might have productive hives on agricultural land, because a lot
Yeah.
of our bees are, when we do our removals, we don't take that honey and put it back in the hive with the bees, because it would just kill them all. It would just spread all over it, get them all sticky, and they would die. So when we do removals, we're taking just the bees and their brood, which is the comb that has their eggs and larvae and pupa in it. We put that in the hive. So they're not, depending on the time of year, there might not be any food available. We have to feed the bees. So oftentimes we're feeding the bees instead of collecting honey from them, just to give them the food stores they need to make it through what we call a dearth, which is the summer, which will start at the end of this month,
Yeah.
through August. Sometimes depends on if we get rain.
Yeah, they're so,
So those bees aren't giving us much honey at all. Maybe next year they will.
what people that don't live in the desert Southwest, there's very, very few plants that will bloom in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And, and the ones that do are almost cherished. I've got some pomegranate trees that just have to bloom all year long, and they'll hold blooms and set fruit in the summer. And the other plant I had in the
Yep.
desert that would always bloom was okra. The only problem with
Oh yeah,
okra,
okra does well in the summer. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it'll set fruit, and the fruit will grow, and it doesn't know that it's hot.
Yeah, there's some loofahs are really awesome plants to grow for bees in the summer. They love it hot. They're vines, and they have loads of blooms. So if you live here, there's definitely plants, and as a beekeeper, you know which ones to. Well, that we try to know which ones are blooming. There's a tree called a cascalote tree, and it blooms throughout the summer. Vitex blooms a lot in the summer. And then, Phoenix is well, it is agriculture. It used to be all orchards,
Hmm.
downtown Phoenix. So a lot of those people still have flood irrigation. So if you've got flood irrigation, people just grow plants like mad there. And the beekeepers that have backyard hives inside Phoenix, they produce a lot more honey than 100 of my hives do.
Okay, okay. And I'm not a honey connoisseur, but I'm always fascinated the different tastes of the different honeys depending on what the bees were getting the pollen from.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
if you've had clover honey from the grocery store, I would really recommend you get out to a bee festival and try some of um, these fascinating honeys. My favorite
Mm-hmm.
since the day I tasted it was mesquite. I don't believe I've
Mm-hmm.
had Palo Verde honey, but now I'm interested in it. Certainly had Palo Verde trees
Yeah.
when we lived there.
I'll
But
send you some. Palo Verde is light color. It's delicious.
is it? Is it? Is it?
Hmm.
Well, it's just cricket. When we come back and do another interview, let's talk about what plants people can grow to
Yes.
try and help the bees.
Yes.
I'm willing to do it. I'm sure there's thousands upon thousands of people that are willing to do it. And the other thing, before we let you go, is there anything we need to know about the Honey Festival coming up?
Yeah, just come to the Honeybee Festival at Paradise Valley Community College in North Phoenix, November 11th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. We're looking for speakers now, but we always have amazing speakers talking about, usually have someone talking about gardening for bees. We have people talking about intro to beekeeping classes, pests and disease management for honeybees usually. But that's the kind of classes we have that we offer, and they're all free, as well as vendors selling honey and other products, and loads of free kids class crafts, and bands playing all day. It's awesome. It's a super fun event.
Well, I hope there's going to be an Indian fried bread vendor there so I can
Oh,
get my
yes.
fried bread with honey Powdered sugar.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Powdered
I grew
sugar.
up eating that.
Well, I did too, and I miss it. I don't get to eat it anymore, but that's okay. I've had
How
it.
did you make it?
I've had it. All right, Cricket. Thanks for joining us. Your passion for the bees, we all respect and appreciate, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, this has been Justin Case and Cricket Aldridge bringing you Bee Havens. Thanks for joining us. Remember, additional information and links are provided in this video's read more, including some video links to some of Cricket's more interesting extractions. Today's the day to subscribe to this channel. Please support bees, bee wranglers, and beekeepers everywhere.